I caught a stalker while hunting a month ago, so I'm an avid hunter. I go every season and I love it. More often than not, I don't kill any game, but I just love getting out into the woods. I don't know if you're familiar with hunting seasons in Pennsylvania, but during late November, rifle seasons is in full swing. It was already the second week of the season, and I had yet to bag any deer, so I was eager to get to it early in the morning, and I did. I normally get up around 5 a.m. and drive to my hunting spot. It's private land that my grandfather owns. Him and I are the only two who hunt on it, and the rest is posted to hunters, and the only others on the land are employed on my grandfather's farm. I had originally planned on calling my grandfather when I woke up and asked him if he wanted to tag along, but the weather that morning was horrendous. Snow was pouring down, and the wind was really strong. I love hunting in the snow, but it almost made me decide not to go, so I knew he wouldn't want to. The roads were really bad, so it took me a bit longer to drive there. Normally, the sun would be starting to rise by now, however, it was overcast and snowing. Regardless of the snow, I walked up to my spot. It was directly behind my grandfather's house over a hill and back about 100 to 150 yards. Almost immediately upon sitting in my spot, I hear things moving all around me. Honestly, I didn't pay it much mind. It could be any number of things, but it was still pitch black, and the thought that it was a deer had crossed my mind. But there wasn't much I could do. It's not like I can't shoot at it, so I just ignore it and continue to wait. It wasn't much longer after that I began hearing something walking over the ridge to my right. At this point, there was barely enough light to see my feet, so even if it was a deer, there was nothing I could do. However, I could tell it wasn't a deer. I just assumed it was my grandfather walking to his post, which is just a short walk from mine. But the light in his house was off, and if he was hunting up here, I'm sure he let me know prior. But even if it wasn't him, it was a hunter, albeit hunting illegally. I still wanted to let him know I was here, so I turned on my flashlight and pointed it in his direction, flashing it several times again. Even if it was a deer, I couldn't shoot it, so I felt it was better to be safe rather than sorry. Nothing much happened after that. After I flashed my light, the noise stopped, which was really odd. I didn't hear them turn back, so I figured A, sat down right there after seeing my light, which is considered extremely rude, or B, I didn't hear them walk off. I just assumed it was the latter. An hour or so passes by, and finally, the first sights of daylight start to shine through. It's still snowing, and the snow is falling in entire snowballs rather than snowflakes. Visibility is pretty limited, but I just grinned and bared it. I love snow, and even if I couldn't see any deer, I still found the weather beautiful. It was around this time that I noticed an odd-looking lump protruding from a group of trees and shrubs atop the hill that separates me from my grandfather's house. Right where I had heard the movement earlier, it looked like a mound of dirt. However, it was sticking out from the side of a tree, so obviously it was not dirt. Naturally, I raised my rifle up to take a closer look. I could tell that I was looking at the side of an older style camouflage coat. It took a minute, but it finally clicked. There was a person over there. I just thought it was a hunter, so I didn't know what to do about it. I knew he was hunting on our land illegally, and for what I could see, he wasn't wearing anything orange, which is required of all hunters during rifle season, and I could just tell from looking whoever this was not my grandfather. I sat there for a minute debating my next move, but I decided to call my granddad at the risk of blowing his hunt if it was him over there. So, without taking my eyes off of this guy, I pulled out my phone and dialed his number. To my dismay, he picked up, and I told him what was going on. So, he told me he'd make his way up, but I decided on my own to give a guy a whistle to let him know I see him, but he did not react at all. After a few minutes, I started to walk up to this guy. After walking a short distance, I could clearly see this guy, who was sound asleep tucked in between a shrub and a couple trees. He obviously thought out where to lay down, as I would never be able to see him had his coat not stuck out, and as I thought he had no orange on, I gave him another whistle, much louder, and he woke up right away, almost immediately shuffling over to hide his exposed coat. He had a nasty, scruffy beard and a gray hat. Honestly, he looked like a harmless old homeless man, probably in his 50s, but he had a perfect view of my granddad's home from his spot, and I have a pretty good idea what he was planning to do once my granddad left the house. Once this guy realized he'd been caught and saw a Matt 6'5" guy carrying a hunting rifle less than 10 yards away making his way closer, his face went pale. Almost instantly, he tried to feed me some bullshit that he gotten lost during a drive with a group of other hunters. However, the closest public game land is miles away from this spot, so I knew this was a lie. He just kept going on and on about how he was lost and he fell asleep. He went as far as to make up a fake name on the spot. I just stood there and listened, making sure he didn't make any fishy movements. I couldn't help but think about what this guy could have done to my grandfather. God knows he had the chance, and that thought pissed me off enough to tell the guy to shut the fuck up. That's about the point where I saw my granddad. My granddad is a tough old bastard, so my first thought was, this idiot is gonna get himself killed. Luckily, nothing happened. After he got there, we practically had to drag this guy down the road, where my granddad called the cops, and I called my dad. Technically, this guy hadn't done anything yet, so all we could charge him was trespassing and stalking. That was about a month ago, and since then, I haven't heard anything else about him, so stalker I found sleeping while I was hunting. Let's not meet again. Someone's messed up shooting practice. I grew up in a small city, so when I moved up into the mountains in Colorado, I took the opportunity to go on a fair amount of walks out in the woods all around my house. For the most part, I would only walk in the woods behind our house since we had a very large property. One day, feeling bored of the woods behind our house, I asked my parents and they told me I could walk the woods across the street. I excitedly rushed to go walking across the street. As soon as I got to the edge of the woods though, I was already a bit unnerved. On the ground, I saw the shell of a bullet. I felt especially frightened because I have a fairly irrational fear of guns, but I decided to get over my fear and continue on because the case was obviously old, covered in dirt and such, and we lived by a big hunting town, so it was to be expected. The next weird thing I came across was a pile of deer hair. I, obviously not knowing much about hunting, saw it and thought that a doe must have laid there when she was having her babies. At that moment, I was excited, not realizing that the hair was most likely the result of a deer being shot in that spot. The final weirdest and most worst thing I found was at a clearing in the woods. A clearing I didn't realize was on a person's property at the time. As soon as I go out of the clearing, I see a large block of styrofoam with 2 iron rods stuck through it to keep it standing in place, and it was full of bullet holes. Looking around, I noticed deer bones scattered around, and the bones of some other animals, including a full set of some small animals' bones laying on a rock beside the styrofoam. Confused and not quite sure what I found, I decided to go and get my parents. When I got them to come, I first showed them the pile of hair, and they pointed out to me how it was probably where a deer had been shot. Then I led them to the styrofoam, and the first thing they pointed out was that we were right in someone's front yard. Mind you, it was a giant front yard, and the house was a small off in the distance. After looking at the dead animals, we noticed 2 things. Not only did one of the animals have a chain around its chaining it to one of the poles of the styrofoam, but some of the animals I couldn't recognize at first were obviously domestic cats and dogs. At the end of the day, all we could do was walk home. It sounds terrible, but the animals were obviously dead for a long time, and we believe they were killed by the crazy former owner of the property we were on. The owner was long gone, and the police force in our town was so small and poorly trained that they probably would have simply gone mad at us for being on someone else's property and not really care about what we found. I'm sad that we couldn't do more, but I genuinely believe no justice would have come from calling the police. So, terrible person who used people's pets as shooting practice. Let's not meet. Hunting in the woods. I love waking up in the dark and walking to sunrise with my dogs. I didn't intend to own 2 huskies and a German Shepherd mix, but they found me, and I couldn't turn them away. We usually jog about 5 miles daily, often in the neighborhood, but nearly as often as I load us up in the van and drive 10 minutes to the wooded metro park. I love it there. They offer some trails that allow quads and motorbikes, some bicycles and skis, some just people. And last year they opened a new one that allows pets. It's a 5-mile loop into the area farthest from the city, We live on the northern edge of town, but in the dark with no leaves on the trees, you can clearly see the red glow of the CVS sign for most of the hike. There are tamed woods with asphalt paths and concrete fire pits, and rangers patrolling regularly in the hospital behind CVS means there is emergency medical care in walking distance. I was up coughing again in the night. I had a serious case of pneumonia 2 months ago and was not fully recovered when this sinus infection hit me. I'm past the fever part, so we're walking, not yet jogging again, but after being up in the night, I didn't get up in time to go walk before I dropped my kids off at school. Then my youngest had an appointment, and then I had to run a few errands. And then we had unexpected visitors right after school, and then they stayed for dinner. And finally, I got the dogs into the van, and we made it to the park just before it started to get dark. I was irritated at all the little things that kept me from my walk all day. But as we drove all the way to the back of the park, I realized we'd been walking the sunset, watching it over the lake and hills and through the bare trees, and the park was clearing out now as it started towards dark. We would very nearly have the place to ourselves, and might not have to pull out the path to let others pass us. An amazing number of people who are afraid of dogs hike the pet path. All those little irritations had led up to this singular moment of beauty I would not yet otherwise have seen and appreciated. This was going to be a really good walk. Funny how life works out when you just let it. I park in my spot at the farthest end of the parking lot by the bathrooms. A mile-long people, walker, jogger's path looped through the woods and by the lake that came out by the bathrooms. I like to run it when I came here alone. It was a glorious walk through a Bob Ross painting. My mind cleared and my thoughts quieted, and I simply experienced the woods. My feet on the path, my dogs panting, the nature sounds, the beauty of the sky. I absolutely loved it. About halfway now, and the city sounds had faded away, till I could only hear the birds and frogs, insects, all singing their songs of territory, mating, life. Crack. Utter silence and absolute stillness. My dogs and I turned instantly towards the source of the sound and froze. Behind us and to the right, the sound had come from the crest of a hill. I could see nothing and heard only the dogs panting. I waited for the nature's sound to return. They did not. All three of the dogs slowly raised their ruffs, fur standing on end all around their shoulders and necks, tails held high and proud, make themselves larger and more threatening. I took a step towards them, and the female husky, the leader of my little pack, instantly put her ears back and her head down and pulled me down the path. All three of them left their tails and ruffs up, but the two males put their ears back and their heads down and began to pull me, and off we went. The woods were still silent. We must have startled a buck on the slope of a hill, not seen him, and after he passed, he leapt up the hill and jumped a dead tree, and his wolf hit a dead branch, and the branch broke crack and scared everyone. Why were the woods still silent? Maybe there's someone up there. Homeless people must stay here sometimes. The bathrooms here have heat so the pipes don't freeze. This is about as far as the path goes. It would be a good place to sleep. Maybe just setting up a shelter and crack, broke a branch. Why were the woods still silent? We were about as far from the city as we could get in these woods, and you couldn't see the CVS sign or the glow from the streetlights, or even hear the traffic noises. It was dark and still absolutely quiet, except for the panting dogs and 4 sets of footsteps on the path. I wanted to run. My dogs wanted to run. Bigfoot. That was a Bigfoot, breaking a lock to stay. Get out! There are no Bigfoots in city limits, I promise you that, brain. It was a deer. The woods are still quiet because of us. I have 200-pound dogs here, and another 200 pounds of me. Yeah, I'm a little fat, but I've got good muscle underneath. I have broad shoulders that don't really fit into women's shirts, and big hands that don't fit into women's gloves. I can lift 100 pounds over my head. We are the scariest things in these woods. There's no bear, there's no wolves, there's no Bigfoots. There are deer, and there are foxes, and there might be angry raccoons, but we are the biggest, baddest, scariest things in these woods. Unless there's someone with a gun. Shut up, man, you're not helping. The dogs had not stopped once to sniff or mark. Heads down, ears back, tails and ruffs still held high. All they wanted was to go. We were gone for a mile now, me craning my head the whole time, trying to see as far as I could in all directions while letting the dogs pull me down the path, and it was still absolutely silent. Not an overflying goose, not a cricket. Nothing moved, nothing made a sound except us. Here came the third and longest of the 3 steep hills on this trail. I have been running these to rebuild my strength and endurance, but if I ran this, I'd be blown at the top where it curved around as it crested. You couldn't see anything past the thick trees. The top where if you were deeper in the woods, you could follow a more gradual ridge up to the crest of the hill and wait, unseen, for someone to come up the path. Ambush! It was a deer. Turn around? It was just a deer. What if it's behind us? Ambush! Deer! Gun? Bigfoot! This is why I run. The noise in my head is unbearable otherwise. Up the hill, walk, pay attention, watch the dogs. The dogs are still on alert, but didn't hesitate to go up the hill. In fact, they wanted to go faster. Just walk, man. Don't get smoked. Be able to run or fight if you have to. Yeah, okay, I'm scared too. The woods should still not be silent. The dog should not be here on such alert. It's not a cat or a bear or a wolf, and I really doubt it's fucking Bigfoot. But it could be a person, so let's be smart, man. Just walk. We are not good prey. The dogs will protect me. The huskies might not alone, but the shepherd will, and they'll follow his lead. Be smart, man. Get out. Only another mile now to the lake and the first parking lot. Then another half-mile along the lake to the second lot, where my van was. Hearing traffic noises now, but still no birds, no crickets, no frogs. A smell almost stopped me in my tracks, but the dogs kept pulling, sour and grassy and oddly metallic and shed and blood and partially digested grass. I smelled the contents of a deer's stomach. Someone hunted these woods, and the dogs were not all interested in the smell. We ran. I don't remember much of that last mile. We just ran. Desna, the big female husky, finally stopped to drink some lake water as we came out by the parking lot. Then she began to sniff and pee. The boys followed her lead. There was a single truck parked. I relaxed quite a bit, but still felt on edge. Down the lake in the next parking lot, I could see headlights. They must be parked at the turnaround at the end of the line closest to the lake. Their headlights illuminated the lakeside path. They're watching us. Halfway to the van now, and the car drove away. 20 feet from the van, I heard a motor coming down the nearest path. I decided to put the dogs in the car on the driver's side instead of the passenger side like normal. The sound of the motor came closer. The leashes caught on the armrest, and I had to untangle them before the dogs could jump into the van. The motor came closer down the path. I had to be gone before it came out. I knew. It was an absolute certainty. Finally, the dogs were in. I slammed the door and jumped in the front, fumbling for the lock button, shaking hands and clipping the keys from my jogging belt, starting the car and gunning it into reverse. As my headlights swept over the entrance of the path by the bathrooms, they lit up a four-wheeler coming out of the woods. I was dropping the transmissions into drive and hitting the gas, and as my brain processed what my eyes saw, it informed me there was something across the handlebars. A gun? A deer carcass? I couldn't tell. And because of the angles when pulling away, I could not see him in the rear view mirror at all.